Billionaire made her sign the divorce in tears. 2 years later, she returned holding a baby. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Blackwood Industries headquarters, its golden light reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Manhattan. Ethan Blackwood stood at his office window, his tall, athletic frame silhouetted against the sprawling cityscape below. At 33, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that turned heads in boardrooms and social gatherings alike. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his steel gray eyes sharp with intelligence, and his tailored charcoal suit emphasized his broad shoulders and confident bearing. But today, those same gray eyes held something different, something cold and distant. Behind him, seated in one of the leather chairs facing his mahogany desk, Isla Bennett clutched a tissue in her trembling hands. Her chestnut hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, framing a face that had always been beautiful in its simplicity. High cheekbones, full lips, and warm brown eyes that now glistened with unshed tears. At 27, she still carried herself with the grace and optimism that had first captured Ethan's attention 5 years ago. But today that optimism was cracking under the weight of his words. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast office. "Last week you told me you loved me. Last week we were planning our vacation to Tuscany." Ethan turned slowly, his expression carefully composed. The man who had once looked at her like she was his entire world, now regarded her with the same clinical detachment he reserved for business negotiations. "Things change, Ela." His voice was steady, measured. "People change. But we're married." The words came out broken, desperate. "We promised each other. We were young." He moved to his desk, opening a manila folder with deliberate precision. "I was 28 when we got married. You were 22. We rushed into something neither of us was ready for." Isla stood abruptly, her flowing burgundy dress swirling around her knees. "That's not true. You pursued me, Ethan. You said I was the only woman who could make you feel human again after your father died. You said—" "I said a lot of things." His interruption was swift, surgical, and I meant them at the time, but I'm not that person anymore. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of traffic 30 floors below. Isla wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold the pieces of her breaking heart together. "Is there someone else?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This isn't about someone else. This is about me needing to live my life. I've been tied down since I was 28, Isla. I've missed out on experiences, on discovering who I really am outside of this marriage." "Tied down?" The words hit her like a physical blow. "Is that what I am to you? A burden?" "You're not a burden." For the first time, his composure wavered slightly. You're wonderful, Isla. You deserve someone who can give you everything you want. Marriage, children, that white picket fence dream you've always talked about. But that's not me. Not anymore." He slid the folder across the desk toward her. "The divorce papers are already prepared. My lawyers have been very generous with the settlement. You'll be more than comfortable." Isla stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. This is already decided? Without even talking to me? I'm talking to you now." "No, you're dismissing me." She moved closer to the desk, her hands pressed flat against its surface. "You're throwing away 5 years of marriage like it means nothing." "It does mean something," Ethan said quietly. "It means we both deserve better than settling for something that's run its course." The tears she'd been fighting finally spilled over, creating silent tracks down her cheeks. "I love you, Ethan. Doesn't that count for anything?" For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his gray eyes, something that might have been regret or longing or pain. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold determination. "Sign the papers, Isla." Her hands shook as she reached for the pen he offered. Each signature felt like signing away a piece of her soul, but she did it anyway. Because what choice did she have? The man she loved, the man she thought she knew, was a stranger sitting across from her, watching her sign away their life together with the same expression he wore during business meetings. When it was done, Ethan collected the papers with efficient movements. "I'll have my assistant arrange for movers to help you with your things. The penthouse is yours until you find somewhere else you'd prefer." Isla stood on unsteady legs, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Ethan, Goodbye, Isla. The finality in his voice stopped her cold. She nodded once, unable to trust her voice, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back one last time, hoping to see some sign of the man who used to hold her like she was precious, who used to whisper promises in the dark. But Ethan had already turned back to the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his attention apparently focused on the city below. As Isla stepped into the hallway, the office door closing behind her with a soft click, she placed a protective hand over her stomach, a gesture that had become unconscious over the past few weeks. The secret she'd been planning to share with him over their anniversary dinner next week would remain hers alone. After all, he'd made it clear he wanted his freedom. But what would he do when he discovered that some bonds could never be broken? 3 weeks later, Isla stood in the pristine bathroom of the penthouse she had once called home, staring at the plastic test in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines. Clear, undeniable, life-changing, pregnant. The irony wasn't lost on her. While Ethan had been coldly dismantling their marriage, claiming he needed freedom from being tied down, their child had been growing inside her. A piece of both of them, created during what she now realized were the final moments of their intimacy. She sank onto the marble edge of the bathtub, the pregnancy test still clutched in her fingers. The penthouse felt enormous around her, all glass and chrome and expensive emptiness. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sparkled in the morning light, but it might as well have been another planet. Her phone buzzed on the vanity. Ethan's name flashed across the screen. For a wild moment, her heart leaped. Maybe he'd realized his mistake. Maybe he was calling to say he'd been an idiot, that he wanted her back, that they could work through whatever crisis had driven him to throw away their marriage. With shaking fingers, she answered. "Hello? Isla." His voice was all business. "I need you to clear out of the penthouse by next week. I have a buyer." The words hit her like ice water. Not an apology, not a moment of regret, just another transaction to close. A buyer? She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Ethan, this was our home. We picked out every piece of furniture together. We're married, past tense." His tone was clipped, efficient. "I've already had 3 moving companies send you quotes. The settlement provides more than enough for you to purchase something suitable." Something suitable? As if their entire life together could be reduced to real estate transactions and financial arrangements. What if I said no? The words came out before she could stop them. What if I refused to leave? There was a pause. When Ethan spoke again, his voice carried a hint of warning. "Don't make this difficult, Isla. We both signed the papers. This is business now. Business." Their 5-year marriage reduced to business. She touched her stomach instinctively, where their child, his child, was growing. He had no idea that he was dismissing not just her, but his own flesh and blood. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll be out by the weekend." "Good. And Isla?" His voice softened just slightly, and for a moment she heard an echo of the man she'd fallen in love with. "I hope you find what you're looking for. You deserve to be happy." The line went dead before she could respond. Isla set the phone down with deliberate care, as if it might shatter like everything else in her life. She looked around the penthouse one more time, at the kitchen where they'd cooked Sunday morning breakfasts, at the living room where they'd curled up watching movies, at the bedroom where they'd made love and whispered dreams to each other in the dark. But mostly she looked at the empty spaces, the gaps on the bookshelves where Ethan had already removed his things, the closet with only her clothes hanging in it, the dining room table that now seated only one. He'd been methodical about erasing himself from this space, just as he'd been methodical about erasing himself from her life. Well, 2 could play that game. Isla walked to the guest bedroom that had served as her art studio and began pulling down her sketches and paintings from the walls. Her illustrations, whimsical children's book artwork that had been bringing in steady freelance income, suddenly looked like her ticket to a new life. If Ethan wanted to be free of her so badly, she'd make it easy for him. She wouldn't fight for the penthouse. She wouldn't beg him to reconsider, and she certainly wouldn't tell him about the baby. He'd made his choice. Now she would make hers. By Thursday afternoon, she'd found a small but charming apartment in Westchester, an hour north of the city. It had large windows perfect for her art studio, a cozy kitchen, and most importantly, it was far enough away that she'd never have to accidentally run into Ethan at their old haunts. The moving truck arrived Friday morning. As the workers carried her belongings down to the lobby, Isla took one final walk through the empty penthouse. In the master bedroom, She found something the movers had missed, a small silver frame that had fallen behind the nightstand. Inside was a photo from their wedding day, Ethan laughing as he spun her around in her white dress, both of them glowing with happiness and promise. For a moment, she traced his face through the glass, remembering how he'd looked at her that day like she was his miracle. Then she tucked the frame into her purse and walked away. As the elevator descended toward the lobby for the last time, Isla pressed her hand to her stomach and made a silent promise. "It's just you and me now, little one. But I'll give you everything I have. All the love your father doesn't think he needs." The elevator doors opened, and she stepped out into her new life. What she didn't see, 30 floors above, was Ethan standing at his office window, watching the moving truck pull away. His hands were pressed against the glass, his face a mask of something that might have been regret. But by the time he turned away from the window, that moment of vulnerability was gone, replaced by the cold determination that had become his armor. After all, he'd gotten exactly what he wanted, hadn't he? 18 months later, Isla Bennett stood in her cozy Westchester apartment, bouncing a giggling baby girl on her hip while stirring oatmeal with her free hand. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting a warm glow over the organized chaos of single motherhood. Baby toys scattered across the hardwood floor, empty bottles drying on the counter, and children's book illustrations pinned to a corkboard near the refrigerator. "What do you think, Elodie? Too much cinnamon?" Isla asked, offering a tiny spoonful to her 15-month-old daughter. Elodie clapped her chubby hands together, her eyes, the same striking gray as her father's, sparkling with delight. Her fine hair was a rich dark brown, and when she smiled, dimples appeared in her cheeks exactly like the ones Isla remembered seeing on Ethan's face during their happiest moments. It was both a blessing and a heartbreak, how much Elodie resembled him. "Mama," Elodie squealed, reaching for the spoon with determined little fingers. "Yes, sweet girl, Mama's making breakfast." Isla kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in that unique baby scent of powder and innocence. The past year and 3 months had been a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, sleepless nights, and the steep learning curve of solo parenting, but it had also been filled with moments of pure joy that Isla had never imagined possible. Elodie's first smile, her first laugh, her first tentative steps just last week, all of it had belonged entirely to them. Isla had built a new life from scratch. Her freelance illustration work had flourished, especially after she'd started creating children's books inspired by her experiences as a new mother. The apartment was small but filled with warmth, hand-painted murals on Elodie's nursery walls, built-in bookshelves overflowing with picture books, and photographs capturing every milestone of her daughter's short life. She'd dated once, about 8 months ago. David, a kind pediatrician she'd met at Elodie's checkup. He'd taken her to dinner, made her laugh, and genuinely seemed interested in both her and her daughter. But when he'd kissed her goodnight, all she could think about was how his lips weren't Ethan's, how his hands didn't make her feel like she was coming home. She hadn't dated since. "We're doing just fine on our own, aren't we, baby?" Isla murmured, settling Elodie into her high chair. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her agent, Miranda. "Urgent. Publisher wants to meet about the new series. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. at the Meridian Hotel in Manhattan." This could be huge, Isla. Career-changing huge. Isla's heart raced as she read the message. The Meridian Hotel, one of Manhattan's most prestigious venues. She'd been working on a series of children's books about a little girl and her adventures, and if this meeting went well, it could mean financial security for her and Elodie. But Manhattan, the city where Ethan ruled his empire, where every corner held memories of their life together. She looked down at Elodie, who was happily smearing oatmeal across her tray. In 15 months, Isla had successfully avoided any chance of running into her ex-husband. She'd chosen Westchester specifically for that reason, lived quietly, shopped locally, and built their little world far from his sphere of influence. But this meeting could change everything for them. The advance alone would let her buy a house with a yard where Elodie could play, maybe even hire help so she could take on bigger projects. "What do you think, little love? Should Mama take a chance?" Elodie banged her spoon against her tray and grinned, oatmeal in her hair. Isla took that as a yes. She called her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a retired grandmother who often watched Elodie for a few hours when Isla had client meetings. Within minutes, it was arranged. Mrs. Chen would babysit tomorrow afternoon. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Isla pulled her one good business dress from the closet, a navy blue sheath that she'd worn to gallery openings in her old life. It still fit perfectly, though she'd have to be careful about her nursing schedule. That evening, after Elodie was asleep in her crib, Isla stood in front of her bathroom mirror, really looking at herself for the first time in months. Motherhood had changed her. Her hair was longer now, often pulled back in practical ponytails. Her face had a softer quality, more mature, and there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The confidence of a woman who'd survived heartbreak and built something beautiful from the ashes. She practiced her presentation, speaking quietly to her reflection. This wasn't just about her anymore. Every decision she made affected Elodie's future. As she brushed her teeth, her phone lit up with a notification. Without thinking, she glanced at the screen. Instagram, a gossip account she'd stupidly never unfollowed. Manhattan's most eligible bachelor spotted at the Rainbow Room with stunning socialite Vivian Cross. Sources say Ethan Blackwood is finally ready to settle down again. Full story inside. The photo showed Ethan in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his arm around a willowy blonde in a designer gown. He was smiling, that devastatingly handsome smile that used to be reserved for Isla alone. Her chest tightened, but not with the crushing pain she'd expected. Instead, she felt nothing. Or maybe not nothing, but something like closure. He'd moved on completely, just as he'd wanted. Good for him. She deleted the app from her phone and finished getting ready for bed. Tomorrow she would walk into that hotel with her head held high, secure her daughter's future, and prove to herself that she was more than just Ethan Blackwood's discarded wife. She was Elodie's mother. She was a successful artist. She was a woman who'd rebuilt her life from scratch. And if fate decided to test her resolve by putting her former husband in her path again, well, she'd handle that too. After all, she'd already survived the worst thing he could do to her. Or so she thought. The Meridian Hotel's marble lobby buzzed with the refined energy of Manhattan's elite. Isla walked through the revolving doors at exactly 1:45 p.m., her heels clicking confidently against the polished floor. She wore her navy dress with a cream blazer. Her hair swept into an elegant chignon that showcased the delicate earrings she'd splurged on that morning. A small act of rebellion against the practical mom uniform she'd been living in. In her arms, Elodie wore an adorable white dress with tiny pink flowers, her dark hair held back by a soft headband. The plan had been simple. Mrs. Chen would watch Elodie during the meeting. But when the elderly woman had called that morning with a sudden flu, Isla had faced an impossible choice. Miss the career-changing meeting or bring her daughter along. She'd chosen to bring Elodie, reasoning that the publisher might appreciate seeing the real inspiration behind her children's books. Welcome to the Meridian. May I help you? The concierge's smile was warm and professional. I'm here for a meeting with Helena Morrison from Storybook Publishing. Conference room Astor? Certainly. Take the elevator to the mezzanine level. The conference rooms are to your right. As Isla waited for the elevator, Elodie babbled happily, reaching for the crystal chandelier overhead. Pretty lights, aren't they, sweetheart? Isla murmured, adjusting her daughter's position. The elevator doors opened and Isla stepped inside, pressing the button for the mezzanine. She used the mirror to check her reflection one last time, ensuring she looked professional despite having a toddler on her hip. The doors began to close when a strong hand suddenly appeared, stopping them. Hold the elevator, please. Isla's blood turned to ice. That voice, deep, authoritative, achingly familiar, belonged to only one person in the world. The doors slid open, and Ethan Blackwood stepped inside. Time seemed to fracture. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither spoke. Ethan stood frozen in the elevator doorway, his perfectly tailored charcoal suit emphasizing his broad shoulders. His steel-gray eyes locked on Isla's face with an expression of complete shock, and then his gaze dropped to the child in her arms. Elodie, oblivious to the tension crackling in the small space, looked up at the tall stranger with curious eyes that were an exact mirror of his own. She studied his face with the unguarded fascination that only toddlers possessed, then broke into a bright smile. "Hi," she said clearly, her first word to her father. Ethan's face went absolutely white. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His eyes moved frantically between Isla and Elodie, taking in every detail. The shape of the child's face, the color of her hair, the unmistakable familiarity of her features. The elevator doors started to close again, and Ethan stumbled backward, letting them shut without stepping inside. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs as the elevator began to rise. Elodie, sensing her mother's distress, reached up to pat Isla's cheek with a tiny palm. "Mama, okay?" Yes, baby, Isla whispered, though her voice was shaking. Mama's okay. But she wasn't okay. In 30 seconds, her carefully constructed world had just imploded. Ethan had seen Elodie. Those intelligent gray eyes had done the math instantly. Elodie was clearly over a year old, which meant the elevator dinged softly as it reached the mezzanine level. Isla stepped out on unsteady legs, walking toward the conference rooms in a daze. Behind her, she could hear the faint sound of another elevator arriving, but she didn't turn around. Conference room Astor was easy to find. Inside, Helena Morrison, a sharp woman in her 50s with kind eyes, was already waiting with a spread of Isla's artwork laid out on the polished table. Isla, wonderful to finally meet you in person. And this must be your inspiration. Helena's smile was genuine as she looked at Elodie. I'm so sorry, Isla began, settling into a chair and adjusting Elodie on her lap. My babysitter got sick at the last minute, and Nonsense. Some of the best children's book illustrators I know are mothers. Now let's talk about this incredible series you've created. For the next hour, Isla tried to focus on Helena's enthusiastic discussion of publication timelines, marketing strategies, and advance payments. The numbers were even better than she'd hoped, enough to secure Elodie's future, to buy them a real home, to build the stable life she'd dreamed of. But her mind kept drifting to that moment in the elevator. The shock on Ethan's face, the way he'd looked at Elodie like he was seeing a ghost. So do we have a deal? Helena's voice brought her back to the present. Yes, Isla said, managing a smile. Absolutely yes. They shook hands, and Helena promised to have contracts sent over within the week. As she gathered her artwork, Isla felt a mix of triumph and dread. This meeting had gone better than her wildest expectations, but now she had to face the inevitable consequence of returning to Manhattan. Ethan knew about Elodie now. As she walked back toward the elevators, Elodie drowsy against her shoulder, Isla's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. But somehow, she knew exactly who it was before she even looked at the screen. We need to talk. Now. I'm in the lobby. Her hands shook as she typed back, There's nothing to discuss. The response came immediately. Don't you dare leave this hotel, Isla. Don't you dare take my daughter and disappear again. My daughter. 2 words that changed everything. Isla looked down at Elodie, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, tiny fist curled in the fabric of her blazer. For 15 months, it had been just the two of them against the world. Now the man who had shattered her heart was claiming ownership of the most precious thing in her life. The elevator arrived and Isla stepped inside, her mind racing. She could take Elodie and leave through a side exit. She could ignore his texts, drive back to Westchester, and pretend this had never happened. But as the elevator descended toward the lobby, she knew she was only delaying the inevitable. Ethan Blackwood was one of the most powerful men in New York. If he wanted to find them, he would. And despite everything he'd put her through, he had a right to know his daughter. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and there he was. Ethan stood near the concierge desk, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand running through his dark hair in a gesture she remembered from their married days when he was stressed or angry. When he saw her, he ended his call abruptly and walked toward them with purposeful strides. For the second time that day, gray eyes met gray eyes as father and daughter looked at each other. This time there was nowhere to run. Ethan stopped 3 feet away from them, close enough that Isla could see the storm brewing in his gray eyes, but far enough that other hotel guests wouldn't overhear what was about to unfold. His jaw was clenched so tightly she could see the muscle ticking beneath his skin, and his hands were balled into fists at his sides. How old is she? His voice was low, controlled, but Isla could hear the barely restrained fury underneath. Elodie stirred against her shoulder, blinking sleepy eyes as she took in the tall man standing before them. She didn't cry or cling to Isla the way she usually did with strangers. Instead, she studied Ethan with that same curious intensity, as if some deep, primal part of her recognized something familiar. 15 months, Isla answered quietly, adjusting her grip on her daughter. 15 months. Ethan repeated the words like they were a death sentence. Which means you were pregnant when you signed those divorce papers. You were carrying my child when you let me end our marriage. The accusation hit her like a slap. I didn't know I was pregnant when I signed them. I found out 3 weeks later. And you chose not to tell me. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. You chose to divorce me. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, earning curious glances from a couple passing by. Isla lowered her voice. You sat in that office and told me you needed freedom, that you didn't want to be tied down. Well, congratulations, Ethan. You got exactly what you wanted. I wanted freedom from a marriage that wasn't working. I didn't want freedom from my child. Elodie's head turned toward Ethan at the sound of his raised voice, and for the first time her lower lip began to tremble. The stress and tension were affecting her, and Isla's protective instincts flared. "You're scaring her," she said firmly, bouncing Elodie gently. "Lower your voice." Ethan immediately modulated his tone, but the intensity remained. "We can't have this conversation here. My car is outside. We're going somewhere private to talk." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Isla turned toward the hotel exit. "I have to get home. Elodie needs her nap and—" "Isla." The way he said her name stopped her cold. When she turned back, she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Vulnerability. Raw, desperate vulnerability. "Please. You've had 15 months with her. Give me 15 minutes. The please undid her. In all their years together, Ethan Blackwood had rarely said please to anyone. He was a man who commanded, who demanded, who expected the world to bend to his will. But right now, he was asking. 15 minutes, she agreed reluctantly. But somewhere public. The hotel restaurant. 10 minutes later, they sat at a corner table in the Meridian's elegant restaurant, Elodie in a high chair between them. The lunch crowd had thinned, giving them relative privacy, while still maintaining the safety of a public space. Ethan hadn't taken his eyes off Elodie since they'd sat down. He watched her every movement with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. The way she picked up Cheerios with her tiny fingers, how she babbled to herself, the way she would suddenly look up and smile at nothing in particular. "She has your eyes," Isla said softly, following his gaze. "But your smile." His voice was hoarse. "God, Isla, she's beautiful." Elodie, as if sensing she was the center of attention, clapped her hands together and let out a delighted squeal. The sound seemed to break something inside Ethan, and Isla watched in shock as his eyes filled with tears. "I've missed everything," he whispered. Her first smile, her first laugh, her first steps. 15 months of my daughter's life, gone. Her first word was "Mama," Isla found herself saying, then immediately regretted it when pain flashed across his face. Of course it was. He reached across the table as if to touch Elodie's hand, then stopped himself. "May I?" Isla nodded, and Ethan gently extended his finger toward his daughter. Elodie grasped it with her tiny fist, holding on with surprising strength. The tears Ethan had been fighting finally spilled over. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered. I'm your daddy." Elodie tilted her head, studying this man who looked so much like her, then brought his finger to her mouth to investigate with her teeth. "She's teething," Isla explained automatically. "She puts everything in her mouth right now." "What else?" Ethan's eyes were hungry for information. "What else should I know about her?" Despite everything between them, Isla found herself answering. "She loves music, any kind of music, and books. She'll sit for hours while I read to her. She's been walking for about 3 weeks now and she's fearless. Yesterday she tried to climb onto the kitchen counter. Is she sleeping through the night? Is she healthy? Has she been sick? Does she?" "Ethan." Isla held up a hand to stop the flood of questions. "She's perfect. She's healthy and happy and loved. Loved by you." His voice was bitter. "Her father is a stranger. That was your choice." "No, it wasn't." The sharpness of his tone made Elodie look up from where she'd been examining his watch. "You made that choice for me, Isla. You decided I didn't deserve to know about her. You made it very clear that you didn't want children. Every time I brought up starting a family, you said we had time, that your career came first, that was then." He leaned forward, his voice intense but quiet. "Things change when you find out you're going to be a father. I would have changed everything if I'd known." "Would you?" Isla challenged. "Or would you have stayed married to me out of obligation, resented both of us for trapping you in a life you didn't want?" The question hung between them like a knife. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. Elodie, oblivious to the tension, had managed to pull Ethan's expensive watch completely off his wrist and was now examining it with intense concentration, occasionally banging it against her high chair tray. "She's going to break it," Isla warned. "I don't care." Ethan's voice was soft, wonder-struck. "She can have anything she wants. Everything I own is hers. She doesn't need your money, Ethan. I've been providing for her just fine. This isn't about money." His eyes snapped back to hers. "This is about the fact that I have a daughter I've never held, never fed, never comforted when she cried. This is about 15 months of being a father that I'll never get back." The pain in his voice was so raw that Isla felt her own eyes begin to sting. "Ethan." I want to be part of her life, he said urgently. I want to know her. I want her to know me. We can work out custody arrangements, visitation schedules, whatever you think is best, but please, Isla, please don't shut me out of this. Before Isla could respond, Elodie let out a frustrated whine and threw Ethan's watch onto the floor. The expensive timepiece hit the marble with a loud clatter, drawing stares from nearby tables. Oh no, Isla started to get up to retrieve it, but Ethan was already bending down. When he straightened up, watch in hand, Elodie was reaching for him with both arms. The universal toddler gesture for pick me up. Da-da, she said clearly, her first word to him that actually meant something. Ethan froze, his face a mask of shock and overwhelming emotion. She doesn't know what that means, Isla said quickly. She calls everyone da-da, the mailman, the grocery clerk, but Ethan wasn't listening. Very carefully, as if Elodie were made of spun glass, he lifted his daughter out of her high chair and into his arms for the first time. The moment their eyes met, something shifted in the air around them. Elodie touched his face with both hands, exploring this new person who held her like she was precious beyond measure, and Ethan looked down at his daughter with an expression of such pure, overwhelming love that it took Isla's breath away. This was the moment that would change everything. Again. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the world condensed to just the three of them. Ethan held Elodie with the careful reverence of a man discovering something sacred, while she examined his face with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. Her tiny fingers traced the line of his jaw, patted his cheek, and tugged gently at his dark hair. She's not afraid of me, he whispered, wonder coloring his voice. She's not afraid of anyone, Isla replied softly, watching her daughter settle comfortably against her father's chest as if she belonged there. She's always been social, happy. Even as a baby, she hardly ever cried. Ethan's arms tightened protectively around Elodie. What was it like? The pregnancy, the birth, was she healthy? Were you okay? The concern in his voice caught Isla off guard. For a moment, she saw a glimpse of the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who used to worry when she had so much as a headache. The pregnancy was good. A little morning sickness in the beginning, but nothing terrible. She was born at 39 weeks, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Perfect APGAR scores. Isla paused, remembering. I was in labor for 14 hours. My neighbor drove me to the hospital. You were alone. It wasn't a question, and the guilt in his voice was unmistakable. I chose to be alone. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. You'd made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me. Elodie began to fuss, sensing the tension building between her parents. Ethan immediately began swaying gently, a natural instinct that surprised both him and Isla. Shh, sweet girl, he murmured, his voice automatically softening. It's okay. The gesture was so unconsciously paternal that Isla felt her heart constrict. This was what she'd imagined during those long, sleepless nights. Ethan comforting their daughter, being the father she'd always known he could be. I should take her home, Isla said abruptly, standing and reaching for Elodie. It's past her nap time, and she gets cranky when her schedule is disrupted. But Ethan stepped back, holding Elodie closer. 5 more minutes, please. Ethan, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, he said urgently. I know I destroyed what we had, and I know I hurt you in ways I'm only beginning to understand. But she's my daughter too, Isla. I can't let you walk away again without knowing when I'll see her next. The desperation in his voice made something crack inside Isla's chest. Despite everything he'd put her through, she could see that meeting Elodie had fundamentally changed him. The cold, distant man who'd handed her divorce papers was gone, replaced by someone raw and vulnerable, and completely undone by love for a child he'd just met. What exactly are you proposing? She asked carefully. I don't know yet. He ran his free hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their marriage when he was trying to solve an impossible problem. Custody arrangements, visitation schedules. We'll need lawyers to work out the details. But I want to be in her life, Isla. I want to be her father. You are her father, Isla said quietly. Biology took care of that. But being a dad, that's different. That's showing up every day, middle of the night feedings, diaper changes, doctor's appointments, tantrums in grocery stores. It's not glamorous, Ethan. It's not a board meeting you can reschedule or a business trip you can delegate. I know that. His gray eyes met hers with startling intensity. Do you think I'm not capable of putting her first? The question hung between them, loaded with the weight of their shared history. Isla thought about all the times during their marriage when his work had taken precedence, when important conversations had been postponed for urgent calls, when she'd felt like she was competing with Blackwood Industries for her husband's attention. But she also remembered the man who'd held her through her father's funeral, who'd surprised her with homemade soup when she had the flu, who'd once driven 4 hours in a snowstorm just to bring her favorite flowers when she was feeling low. "I think," she said slowly, "that you're capable of anything when you decide it matters to you." Elodie had grown heavy in Ethan's arms, her head drooping against his shoulder as sleep began to claim her. The sight of her daughter finding comfort in her father's embrace was both beautiful and terrifying. "She really does need to nap," Isla said softly. Ethan nodded reluctantly, but when he moved to hand Elodie back, the toddler whimpered and clung to his shirt. "She doesn't want to leave you," Isla observed, surprised by the pang of something that might have been jealousy. "Maybe she knows," Ethan said quietly, gently stroking Elodie's back. "Maybe she knows I'm never letting her go again." The words sent a chill down Isla's spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've lost 15 months with my daughter, and I'm not losing another day." His voice was quiet, but firm. "I'll do whatever it takes to be part of her life. Whatever it takes, Isla." There was something in his tone, a hint of the ruthless businessman who'd built an empire through sheer force of will, that made Isla's protective instincts flare. "You can't just demand your way into her life because you've decided you want to be a father now," she said, her voice hardening. "She has a routine, a life, people who care about her. I won't let you disrupt that just because you're suddenly feeling paternal." "People who care about her?" Ethan's eyes flashed. "You mean people who've been there while her actual father was kept in the dark about her existence?" "Her actual father walked away from her mother before she was even born," Isla shot back. "Her actual father said he wanted freedom more than family." "I didn't walk away from her." The sharpness of his voice woke Elodie, who looked up at him with startled eyes. Isla immediately reached for her daughter, and this time Ethan didn't resist. Elodie settled against her mother's familiar warmth, but her eyes remained fixed on Ethan with an expression that seemed far too knowing for a 15-month-old. "You're right," Ethan said after a moment, his voice heavy with regret. "I walked away from you. I walked away from our marriage, from the life we could have built together, but I didn't know about her, and now I do. That changes everything." Isla looked down at Elodie, who was fighting sleep, her tiny fist clutched in the fabric of her mother's blazer. "It changes everything for you. For us, it complicates everything. Then let's figure out how to uncomplicate it." Ethan pulled out his phone. "What's your number? I'll call you tonight after she's asleep and we can start working out the details." Isla hesitated. Giving him her number felt like opening a door she'd spent 15 months keeping firmly closed. But Elodie deserved to know her father, and despite everything between them, Ethan deserved the chance to know his daughter. She rattled off her number, watching him enter it into his contacts with the same focused attention he'd once given to million-dollar deals. "I'll call you at 8, he said. "We have a lot to discuss." As Isla gathered her things and prepared to leave, Ethan stepped closer. For a moment she thought he might try to hug her goodbye, the way he used to after every separation, no matter how brief. Instead, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to the top of Elodie's head. "Goodbye, sweetheart," he whispered. "Daddy will see you very soon." The word daddy in his voice made Isla's chest tight with emotions she wasn't ready to name. As she walked away through the hotel lobby, Elodie's head on her shoulder, Isla could feel Ethan watching them go. When she reached the revolving doors, she couldn't help but glance back. He was still standing where she'd left him, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes following their every step. For the first time in over a year, Ethan Blackwood looked like a man who'd lost something he couldn't afford to lose. The question was, what was he willing to sacrifice to get it back? The drive back to Westchester felt endless. Elodie slept peacefully in her car seat, occasionally making the soft baby sounds that usually brought Isla comfort. But today, those sounds only reminded her of the impossible situation she now faced. Ethan knew about his daughter. After 15 months of building a life that revolved entirely around protecting Elodie and creating stability for both of them, everything had changed in the span of an elevator ride. By the time Isla pulled into her apartment complex, her phone had already buzzed 3 times with texts from unknown Manhattan numbers. She ignored them, focusing instead on getting a drowsy Elodie upstairs and settled for her afternoon nap. The familiar routine of changing Elodie's diaper, reading her a story, and tucking her into her crib should have been soothing. Instead, Isla found herself studying her daughter's face with new eyes, cataloging all the ways she resembled her father, the shape of her nose, the determined set of her jaw when she was concentrating, the way her eyebrows drew together when she was thinking. How had she ever thought she could keep this secret forever? Once Elodie was asleep, Isla finally checked her phone. The texts were all from the same number. Ethan's. I can't stop thinking about her smile. Does she like music? I remember you always humming while you worked. I want to do this right, Isla. We need to talk. Each message felt like a small invasion into the peaceful world she'd built. Isla set the phone aside and tried to focus on work, spreading her latest illustrations across the kitchen table. But concentration was impossible. Every few minutes she found herself glancing toward Elodie's room, half expecting Ethan to somehow materialize and demand his rights as a father. At exactly 8 o'clock, her phone rang. Hello, Ethan. Is she asleep? His voice was softer than it had been at the hotel, almost tentative. Yes. She went down about an hour ago. Isla curled up in her favorite armchair, pulling a throw blanket around her legs. She was exhausted from all the excitement. I've been thinking about what you said, about showing up every day, about it not being glamorous. There was a pause. You're right. I don't know anything about being a father, but I want to learn. Learning means starting small, Ethan. It means building trust with her and with me. What would that look like? Isla had been dreading this conversation, but now that it was happening, she found herself thinking practically. Maybe we start with a few hours on weekends, somewhere neutral where she feels safe, a park maybe, or the children's museum. I want more than a few hours on weekends. His voice carried that familiar edge of command that she remembered from their marriage. I want overnight visits, holidays, real time with my daughter. She's never spent a night away from me, Isla said firmly. She's 15 months old, Ethan. She doesn't even know you. Then let me get to know her. Let me be part of her daily routine. What are you suggesting? I don't know yet. The honesty in his admission surprised her. Maybe I could come to Westchester sometimes. Help with bath time, bedtime stories. Show her that I'm consistent, that I'm not going anywhere. The image of Ethan in her small apartment, reading bedtime stories to Elodie, was both appealing and terrifying. And what happens when you get bored? When the novelty wears off and you remember that you wanted freedom more than family? That won't happen. How can you be so sure? 2 years ago, you threw away 5 years of marriage because you felt trapped. What makes you think parenthood will be different? The silence stretched so long that Isla wondered if the call had dropped. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was raw. Because when I held her today, it was like I'd been holding my breath for 2 years and could finally breathe again. Because when she looked at me, I saw everything I'd been searching for in all the wrong places. He paused. I can't explain it, Isla. I just know that walking away from her would destroy me in ways that walking away from our marriage never could. The pain in his voice made her chest tight. Ethan, I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go, he continued. I thought I wanted to be free, but all I've been is empty. And now I find out that while I was trying to fill that emptiness with meaningless relationships and distractions, you were raising our daughter alone. I can't get those 15 months back, but I can make sure I don't miss another day. Isla closed her eyes, fighting against the pull of his words. This was the Ethan she'd fallen in love with. Vulnerable, honest, completely present. But she'd learned not to trust those moments because they never lasted. I need guarantees, she said finally. I need to know that you're not going to disappear from her life the moment things get difficult. What kind of guarantees? Legal ones. If we're going to do this, we do it properly. Custody agreements, child support, everything documented and official. Fine. I'll have my lawyers draw up papers. The businesslike tone was back, and it made Isla's stomach clench. This isn't a merger, Ethan. This is our daughter's life. I know that. His voice softened again. I'm sorry, I want to make sure everything is protected. For her, and for you. What about Vivian? The question came out before Isla could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. She had no right to ask about his personal life anymore. Vivian? Ethan sounded genuinely confused. The woman from the Instagram photo. Your girlfriend. She's not my girlfriend. That was one date, a setup by my business partner. There's no one serious, Isla. There hasn't been anyone serious since... He trailed off, but she knew what he meant. Since her. The admission shouldn't have mattered, but it did. More than she wanted to acknowledge. Look, Ethan continued. I know this is complicated. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I put you through. But Elodie deserves to have both her parents in her life. And maybe if we can figure out how to co-parent successfully, we can also figure out how to forgive each other. Forgiveness is earned, Ethan, not negotiated. Then tell me how to earn it. The simple question caught her completely off guard. In all their fights during their marriage, Ethan had never asked how to fix things. He'd assumed his money, his grand gestures, his eventual attention would be enough. But he'd never simply asked what she needed. "Start by proving that you can put Elodie first," she said quietly. "Show me that you can be reliable, consistent, present. Show me that you understand what being a parent actually means." "How long?" "How long what? How long do I have to prove myself before you'll consider joint custody?" The question made her heart race. Joint custody meant splitting holidays, weekends, summers. It meant sharing the most important thing in her life with the man who'd shattered her heart. "I don't know," she admitted. "We'll have to see how it goes." "Fair enough." There was a pause. "Can I see her this weekend? Saturday afternoon, maybe? We could go to that park you mentioned." Isla looked toward Elodie's room where her daughter slept peacefully, unaware that her world was about to change forever. "Saturday afternoon," she agreed, "but just for a couple of hours. Thank you." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Isla, I won't let you down. Either of you." After he hung up, Isla sat in her chair for a long time, staring at her phone. She'd just agreed to let the man who'd broken her heart back into her life. More importantly, she'd agreed to let him into Elodie's life. She could only hope she hadn't just made the biggest mistake of her life. Outside her window, snow began to fall, the first snowfall of the season. As she watched the flakes drift past the streetlights, Isla couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change again. The question was whether this time, the change would heal them or destroy what little peace she'd managed to build. Saturday arrived gray and cold, with a bitter wind that made Isla question the wisdom of a park visit. She'd barely slept the night before, running through every possible scenario of how the afternoon might unfold. What if Elodie had a meltdown? What if Ethan got frustrated with the realities of toddler behavior? What if seeing them together made her own carefully guarded feelings even more complicated than they already were? By noon, she'd changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a cream sweater, practical for chasing after a toddler, but still put together enough that she didn't feel completely outmatched by whatever designer ensemble Ethan would inevitably be wearing. Elodie, oblivious to her mother's anxiety, was in a particularly good mood. She'd woken up babbling happily, eaten all her breakfast without throwing any on the floor, and was now contentedly playing with blocks while Isla packed the diaper bag with military precision. "We're going to see the nice man from yesterday," Isla told her daughter, testing how the words felt. "Remember? The one with the pretty watch you tried to eat?" Elodie looked up at the mention of the watch, clapping her hands together. "Da-da." The casual way she said it made Isla's heart skip. "Yes, sweetie. We're going to see Daddy." The word felt foreign on her tongue. For 15 months there had been no daddy in their vocabulary, no need for that particular designation. It was always just Mama and Elodie against the world. Isla's phone buzzed with a text. "Running 5 minutes late, traffic from the city. See you soon." At least he was communicating, she thought. During their marriage, Ethan's lateness had been a constant source of friction, not because he was inconsiderate, but because he seemed to exist in a world where schedules bent to his will rather than the other way around. When they arrived at Riverside Park, Isla was surprised to see Ethan already there, standing near the playground entrance. He'd traded his usual business attire for dark jeans and a charcoal wool coat, looking more approachable than she'd seen him in years. In his hands was a small wrapped package. "You brought her a gift?" Isla asked as they approached. "I wasn't sure if I should," Ethan admitted, looking uncertain. "I didn't want to seem like I was trying to buy her affection, but I saw this and thought." He trailed off, then held out the package. "Maybe you should decide if it's appropriate." Isla unwrapped the small box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet designed for babies, adjustable with tiny charms that spelled out ELODIE. It was beautiful, thoughtful, and probably cost more than Isla's monthly grocery budget. "It's lovely," she said softly, "but maybe save it for when she's older. She puts everything in her mouth right now." "Of course." Ethan slipped the box back into his coat pocket, looking embarrassed. "I should have thought of that." Elodie, meanwhile, had spotted the playground and was straining against her stroller straps, making impatient sounds. "Someone's eager to play," Ethan observed, and Isla was struck by how carefully he was watching their daughter, cataloging every expression and sound. "She loves the swings," Isla said, unbuckling Elodie and lifting her out. "And the slide, though she's still too little for the big one." For the next hour, Ethan threw himself into playground duty with the same intensity he'd once brought to board meetings. He pushed Elodie on the baby swings, helped her navigate the small slide, and showed remarkable patience when she insisted on climbing the same 3 steps repeatedly. "Again!" Elodie demanded after her 10th trip down the slide, and Ethan immediately positioned himself to catch her at the bottom. "She's got you well trained already," Isla observed, settling on a nearby bench. "She's perfect," Ethan said simply, lifting Elodie back to the top of the slide. "Look at that concentration, she's so determined. She gets that from you." The words slipped out before Isla could stop them. Their eyes met across the playground, and for a moment, the years fell away. This could have been them 2 years ago if things had been different. If he'd wanted children then, if she'd told him about the pregnancy, if they'd figured out how to fight for their marriage instead of giving up. "Mama," Elodie called from the top of the slide, breaking the spell. "Look, I'm looking, baby girl," Isla called back, focusing on her daughter instead of the impossible thoughts swirling in her head. When Elodie finally tired of the playground, they walked along the park's winding paths. Ethan had insisted on pushing the stroller, and Isla found herself walking beside him in comfortable silence. It was strange how natural it felt, despite everything between them. "She's going to need a winter coat soon," Ethan said, adjusting the blanket around Elodie's legs. "Something warmer than this." "I've been looking," Isla replied. "There's a children's store in town that has good quality coats for reasonable prices. Let me buy it for her." The offer was casual, but Isla heard the underlying current. "Ethan, you don't need to. I want to contribute," he said firmly. "I've missed 15 months of providing for my daughter. Let me start somewhere." Before Isla could respond, Elodie pointed at a cluster of ducks near the pond and let out an excited squeal. "Duck! Duck! Should we go see the ducks?" Ethan asked, immediately changing direction toward the water. As they stood at the pond's edge, watching Elodie's delighted reaction to the waterfowl, Ethan's phone began to ring. He glanced at the screen, and Isla saw something familiar cross his face, that look of a man torn between competing priorities. "Important call?" she asked, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. Ethan looked at his phone again, then deliberately declined the call and slipped it back into his pocket. Nothing more important than this. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. The Ethan she'd been married to would have taken the call, would have assumed she'd understand that business came first. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not taking the call. For being present." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "I meant what I said on the phone, Isla. I'm not going anywhere. He gestured toward Elodie, who was now trying to communicate with the ducks in her own babbling language. "This is what matters." As if sensing their attention, Elodie turned around and reached for both of them simultaneously, one small hand toward Isla and one toward Ethan. Without thinking, they both stepped closer, creating a small circle around her. For a moment, they looked like what they'd never had the chance to be, a family. "I should probably get her home," Isla said finally, breaking the spell. "She needs lunch and a nap." "Of course." Ethan's disappointment was obvious, but he didn't argue. "When can I see her again?" "Maybe Wednesday afternoon? If you can get away from work?" "I'll make it work." He bent down to Elodie's level. "Bye-bye, sweetheart. Daddy will see you soon." Elodie waved her little hand, then surprised them both by leaning forward and patting Ethan's cheek, the same gesture she'd made in the hotel restaurant. "Bye-bye, Dada," she said clearly. Ethan's face transformed, joy and pain mingling in equal measure. "Bye-bye, baby girl." As Isla loaded Elodie back into her car seat, she could feel Ethan watching them. When she straightened up, he was standing by her car window. "Thank you," he said, "for today, for giving me this chance. I know it can't be easy." "It's not about what's easy," Isla replied. "It's about what's right for Elodie. And what about what's right for you?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I hurt you. Badly. And now I'm asking you to trust me with the most important thing in your life. That has to be terrifying." His acknowledgement of her sacrifice, of what this cost her emotionally, was unexpected. "It is terrifying," she admitted, "but she deserves to know her father. And despite everything, I believe you're a good man, Ethan. You just got lost for a while." He reached out as if to touch her face, then caught himself and dropped his hand. "Maybe we both did." As Isla drove away, Elodie already falling asleep in her car seat, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Ethan was still standing in the parking lot, watching them disappear into traffic. For the first time since their divorce, Isla allowed herself to wonder, what if they could find their way back to each other? The thought was dangerous, she knew. But as Elodie mumbled, "Dada," in her sleep, Isla couldn't quite push it away. 3 weeks later, Ethan's presence in their lives had become as natural as breathing. Wednesday afternoons at the park had expanded to Saturday mornings at the Children's Museum, then Sunday brunches at child-friendly cafes. He'd even started picking up groceries for them, claiming it was on his way from the city, though Isla knew Westchester was a 40-minute detour from anywhere Ethan needed to be. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, Ethan was coming to their apartment for dinner, the first time he'd been in Isla's personal space since their divorce. Isla had spent the afternoon cleaning obsessively, then cooking Elodie's favorite meal, homemade mac and cheese with steamed broccoli that her daughter would inevitably ignore. She'd told herself it was just dinner, just co-parents sharing a meal with their child. But she'd also changed her outfit twice and put on the perfume that Ethan used to say reminded him of spring rain. "Dada coming?" Elodie asked for the 10th time, pressed against the living room window watching for cars. "Yes, sweetheart, Daddy's coming for dinner." The word daddy came easily now, though it still sent a small flutter through Isla's chest every time she said it. Watching Ethan with Elodie over the past few weeks had been a revelation. He was patient, attentive, and completely smitten. More than that, he seemed to genuinely enjoy the mundane aspects of parenting that Isla had expected would frustrate him. Last Saturday, Elodie had thrown up all over his expensive sweater at the museum. Instead of being disgusted, he'd simply cleaned her up, bought a souvenir t-shirt from the gift shop, and spent the rest of the afternoon wearing a shirt with cartoon dinosaurs that was 2 sizes too small. The intercom buzzed at exactly 6 o'clock. "It's me," Ethan's voice came through the speaker. "Come up. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. Isla smoothed her hair one last time and opened the door, Elodie immediately breaking free from her arms to toddle toward the stairwell. "Dada! Dada!" Elodie squealed as Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she giggled. "Hello, my beautiful girl. Did you miss me?" "Missed you," Elodie declared, though Isla wasn't sure if she really understood the concept or was just mimicking the phrase she'd heard Isla use. Ethan looked good. He always looked good, but there was something different about him lately. The sharp edges that had defined him during their marriage had softened. He smiled more easily, laughed more freely, and looked at the world with something that might have been contentment. "This is lovely," he said, looking around the apartment as he set Elodie down. "It's so warm." The compliment pleased her more than it should have. The apartment was small compared to the penthouse they'd shared, but Isla had worked hard to make it feel like home. Soft lighting, books everywhere, Elodie's artwork taped proudly to the refrigerator, and family photos, though notably, none that included Ethan. "It suits us," Isla said simply. Dinner was surprisingly relaxed. Elodie showed off her new skills, feeding herself with a spoon, mostly successfully, saying please and thank you when prompted, and demonstrating her impressive vocabulary of animal sounds. "She's so smart," Ethan marveled as Elodie correctly identified every animal in her picture book. "Is this normal for her age?" "She's been talking early," Isla admitted, "and she loves books. I read to her every night before bed. Would it be okay if I did that sometime, read her a bedtime story?" The request was tentative, almost shy. "You want to do bedtime?" "I want to do everything," he said quietly, his eyes on Elodie. "I want to know what she's like when she's sleepy and cranky. I want to see her first thing in the morning. I want to comfort her when she has nightmares." The longing in his voice made Isla's chest tight. "Ethan, I know," he said quickly. "I know we're not there yet. I'm grateful for what you're giving me. These dinners, the park visits. It's more than I deserve. You're her father. You deserve to know your daughter. And what about you?" He looked up from his plate, his gray eyes intense. "What do I deserve from you?" The question hung between them, loaded with history and possibility. Before Isla could answer, Elodie threw her sippy cup on the floor and declared, "All done." The moment broken, they moved into the familiar routine of cleaning up. Ethan insisted on helping with dishes while Isla gave Elodie a quick bath. When she emerged from the bathroom with a clean, pajama-clad toddler, she found Ethan sitting on the living room floor, examining the framed photos on her coffee table. "You kept this one," he said softly, holding up a picture from their 2nd anniversary, the two of them on a beach in Santorini, tanned and laughing, completely unaware of how their story would end. "I kept a few," Isla admitted, settling on the couch with Elodie. "For her. I thought she should know that her parents were happy once." "We were happy," Ethan said, his voice thick with memory. "God, Isla, we were so happy. How did we lose that?" "You know how. I was an idiot." He set the photo down carefully. I was scared and selfish, and I convinced myself that what we had wasn't enough. But it was everything. You were everything. Elodie, sensing the heavy emotion in the room, crawled from Isla's lap to Ethan's, settling against his chest with her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Story time?" she asked hopefully. "Yes, baby girl. Story time." Ethan's voice was gentle as he reached for one of her books. "What should we read tonight?" As Ethan read to Elodie, his deep voice bringing the silly story to life, Isla found herself studying them. The way Elodie's head fit perfectly against his shoulder, the way his large hands were so gentle turning the pages, the way he made funny voices for all the characters, completely unself-conscious about his dignity. This was what she'd dreamed of during those long, lonely nights when she was pregnant. This exact scene, the three of them together, safe and content and whole. "Mama's story too," Elodie announced when the book was finished. "Mama tells the best stories," Ethan agreed, looking up at Isla. "Will you tell us one?" So Isla found herself sitting on the floor beside them, making up a story about a little girl who lived in a castle made of books and had adventures with talking animals. Elodie's eyes grew heavy as the story progressed, but she fought sleep, not wanting the moment to end. "I think someone's ready for bed," Isla said softly, when Elodie's eyes finally closed completely. Ethan carefully stood up, cradling their sleeping daughter. "Should I put her in her crib?" Isla nodded, leading him to Elodie's nursery. The room was painted a soft yellow, with hand-painted flowers climbing the walls and a mobile of paper butterflies hanging over the crib. Ethan laid Elodie down with infinite care, pulling her favorite blanket up to her chin. "Sweet dreams, my love," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As they tiptoed out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar, Isla felt a dangerous flutter of something that felt suspiciously like hope. "Coffee?" she offered, needing something to do with her hands. "Please." They settled on the couch with their mugs, the apartment quiet except for the soft sound of Elodie's breathing through the baby monitor. "This is nice," Ethan said quietly. "Being here with both of you. It feels... like what?" "Like home." He set down his coffee cup and turned to face her. "I know I have no right to say this, and I know I hurt you in ways I'm still trying to understand. But these past few weeks, seeing you with Elodie, being part of your lives, Isla, I think I'm falling in love with you all over again." The admission hit her like a physical blow. "Ethan, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm not expecting you to feel the same way. I needed you to know. I needed you to know that walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life, and if I could take it back, if I could do everything differently." "But you can't," Isla interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't take it back. You can't undo the pain or the nights I cried myself to sleep or the fact that I went through pregnancy and childbirth alone because you decided you didn't want to be tied down. I know." His voice broke slightly. "I know I can't change any of that. But maybe we could start over? Maybe we could see if there's still something worth fighting for." Isla looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But she also saw the man who'd handed her divorce papers with cold efficiency, who'd chosen freedom over love, who'd left her to rebuild her life from ashes. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she whispered. "Then let me earn it back." He reached for her hand and she didn't pull away. "Let me prove that I'm not the same man who walked away from you. Let me show you that we could be a family, really be a family." Before Isla could respond, the baby monitor crackled with the sound of Elodie stirring. They both froze, listening, but she settled back into sleep. In the quiet that followed, Ethan brought Isla's hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Just think about it," he said softly. "That's all I'm asking." But as Isla looked into his eyes, she realized she'd already been thinking about it. For weeks now, she'd been imagining what it would be like to be a family again. The thought terrified her, but it also filled her with a longing so intense it took her breath away. The question was, could she risk her heart again for the chance at the life they'd almost had? 2 days later, Isla's carefully reconstructed world came crashing down with a single phone call. She was in her kitchen, sketching new illustrations while Elodie napped, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. "Is this Isla Bennett?" The voice was female, crisp, professional. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Jennifer Walsh from the Manhattan Herald. I'm calling about a story we're running tomorrow regarding Ethan Blackwood and his recently discovered daughter." Isla's blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry, what?" We have confirmation that Mr. Blackwood has a 15-month-old daughter with his ex-wife, Isla Bennett. The story details how the child was kept secret from him for over a year. We'd like to get your comment before publication. The phone slipped from Isla's numb fingers, clattering onto the kitchen counter. Through the baby monitor, she could hear Elodie stirring from her nap, making the soft sounds that meant she'd be fully awake soon. With shaking hands, Isla picked up the phone. Who told you this? I can't reveal my sources, but the story will run with or without your comment. It would be better for everyone if you cooperated. No comment, Isla managed, and hung up. Her phone immediately started ringing again. Different numbers, other reporters who'd somehow gotten hold of the story. Isla turned it off completely, her mind racing. How had this happened? Who could have leaked the information? The answer came with a knock at her door 20 minutes later. Isla, open up. We need to talk. Ethan's voice was urgent, strained. She opened the door to find him looking like he'd run the entire way from Manhattan. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, and there was something in his eyes that looked dangerously close to panic. Did you know? She demanded without preamble. Did you know they were going to print this story? Of course I didn't know. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I found out an hour ago when my publicist called in a panic. Isla, I swear to you I had nothing to do with this. Then how? I don't know. Maybe someone at the hotel saw us together. Maybe a photographer followed us to the park. In my world, privacy is a luxury that's constantly under threat. Elodie appeared in the hallway, rubbing sleepy eyes. When she saw Ethan, her face lit up. Dada. Hey, sweetheart, Ethan said, but his voice was strained as he picked her up. Isla, we need to get ahead of this. My team is already working on damage control, but damage control? The words hit her like a slap. Is that what this is to you? Damage to be controlled? That's not what I meant, isn't it? Isla's voice rose, and Elodie looked between her parents with growing confusion. You're already treating this like a PR crisis instead of our daughter's privacy being violated. I'm trying to protect both of you, Ethan shot back. Do you have any idea what it's going to be like when this story breaks? Reporters camping outside your apartment, photographers following you to the grocery store, people digging into every aspect of your life looking for more stories. As if summoned by his words, there was a commotion outside, car doors slamming, voices calling questions. Isla ran to the window and saw 3 news vans pulling up to her building. Oh God, she whispered. They're already here. Ethan joined her at the window, Elodie still in his arms. We need to get you both out of here, now. Where? Where can we go that they won't follow? My house in the Hamptons. It's private, secure. We can figure out our next move from there. Isla spun around to face him. Our next move? There is no "our" in this, Ethan. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Getting pulled back into your world, into the chaos and scrutiny and complete lack of privacy. Mama? Elodie's voice was small, uncertain. The raised voices and tension were frightening her. Isla immediately softened her tone, taking Elodie from Ethan's arms. It's okay, baby. Mama and Daddy are just talking. But this is temporary, Ethan said urgently. Once the initial interest dies down, things will go back to normal. Will they? Isla challenged. Or will there always be another story, another scandal, another reason why our lives aren't our own? I can't live like that, Ethan. I won't raise Elodie in a fishbowl. The intercom buzzed insistently, reporters trying to get access to the building. Through the window, Isla could see neighbors peering out, drawn by the commotion. You don't have a choice right now, Ethan said grimly. Like it or not, the story is out there. The only question is whether you face it alone, or let me help you. Isla looked down at Elodie, who was clutching her stuffed rabbit and looking scared. In 15 months, their life had been peaceful, predictable, safe. Now, because of one moment in a hotel elevator, all of that was gone. If I come with you, she said slowly, it's just until this dies down. It doesn't change anything between us. I understand. And I want legal protections in place. Something that ensures Elodie's privacy going forward. Already in the works. Isla studied his face, looking for any sign of the calculating businessman who might see this crisis as an opportunity to get what he wanted. Instead, she saw genuine fear, not for his reputation or his business, but for them. Okay, she said finally. But we pack fast and we leave through the back entrance. 20 minutes later, they were in Ethan's car, driving through Queens toward Long Island. Elodie had fallen asleep in her car seat, exhausted by the stress and excitement. In the rearview mirror, Isla could see a pair of cars following them, photographers hoping for the shot that would accompany tomorrow's headlines. I'm sorry, Ethan said quietly, his hands gripping the steering wheel. I'm so sorry this happened. If I could take it back. You can't, Isla interrupted. You can't take back the divorce. You can't take back the secrecy. And you can't take back the fact that our private business is about to be splashed across every gossip website in the country. So what are you saying? Isla was quiet for a long moment, watching the familiar landscapes of her peaceful life disappear behind them. I'm saying that I think I made a mistake, letting you back into our lives, believing that we could co-parent without complications, thinking that maybe, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought, thinking that maybe we could be a family again. Yes, the admission was barely a whisper. But this, she gestured toward the cars following them. This is why I left your world, Ethan. This is why I built a new life in Westchester, because I knew that loving you meant accepting that I would never have privacy, never have peace, never have a normal life. It doesn't have to be this way, doesn't it? She turned to look at him. You're Ethan Blackwood. You're worth billions of dollars. You date socialites. You live in the public eye. That's who you are. And I'm just a children's book illustrator who wants to raise her daughter in quiet anonymity. We don't fit, Ethan. We never did. The words hung between them like a verdict. In the back seat, Elodie slept on, unaware that her parents were once again tearing apart the fragile family they'd been trying to rebuild. So that's it? Ethan's voice was raw. One crisis, and you're ready to walk away again? I'm not walking away from Elodie, Isla said firmly. I'm walking away from the fairy tale that we could somehow make this work. You'll always be her father, and you'll always have a place in her life. But us? There is no us, Ethan. There can't be. As they pulled into the driveway of his Hamptons estate, Isla realized she was right back where she'd started 2 years ago, in love with a man whose world would never truly be hers, making the impossible choice between her heart and her peace of mind. Only this time she wasn't just choosing for herself, she was choosing for their daughter too. And that changed everything. 6 months later, the small beach house in Montauk was nothing like the Hamptons estate where they'd taken refuge that chaotic day. It was simple, weathered by salt air and time, with wide windows that let in the morning light, and a wraparound porch where Elodie could play safely while the ocean crashed nearby. Isla stood at the kitchen window, watching her now 21-month-old daughter toddle across the sand with the fearless determination that had become her trademark. Elodie was chasing seagulls, her dark hair whipping in the coastal breeze, her delighted laughter carrying on the wind. Careful, sweetheart, Ethan called from where he sat on the porch steps, close enough to catch her if she fell, but far enough away to let her explore. The sight of them together still made Isla's heart do complicated things, even after all this time. The media storm had lasted exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of photographers camped outside wherever they went, of lawyers issuing cease and desist orders, of Isla learning to navigate grocery shopping with bodyguards. It had been everything she'd feared and worse, but then something unexpected happened. The public, rather than treating them like a scandal, had embraced their story. Single mother reunited with billionaire father, a love story with a second chance. It was the kind of narrative that captured hearts rather than judgment. More importantly, Ethan had done something that surprised everyone, including Isla. He'd stepped back from the public eye entirely, not from his business. Blackwood Industries continued to thrive under his leadership. But he'd stopped attending galas, stopped dating publicly, stopped living the high-profile lifestyle that had defined him for years. Instead, he'd quietly purchased this beach house and asked Isla if she and Elodie might consider spending weekends here, away from the city, away from the scrutiny. Just weekends, he'd promised. Your weekdays are still yours. Your life in Westchester is still yours. But maybe we could try building something here, something just for us. 6 months later, those weekends had become the rhythm of their lives. Mama! Bird! Elodie called, pointing excitedly at a particularly bold seagull that had landed near her feet. I see it, baby girl, Isla called back, stepping onto the porch. What does the bird say? Squawk, Elodie responded with enthusiasm, then attempted her own version of the sound. Ethan laughed, the sound rich and warm in the morning air. She's got perfect pitch, he said, patting the step beside him in invitation. Isla settled next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched. It was a small intimacy, but one that had taken months to feel natural again. She's going to sleep well tonight, Isla observed. All this beach air and exercise. Good. I'm making dinner, that pasta dish she likes. You don't have to cook every time we're here, Ethan. I want to. He looked out at Elodie, who was now trying to convince the seagull to play fetch with a piece of seaweed. I miss too much already. I'm not missing anything else. In the 6 months since the media crisis, Ethan had proven those words over and over. He'd learned Elodie's schedule by heart, mastered the art of the perfect grilled cheese sandwich, and could recite "Goodnight Moon" from memory. More than that, he'd learned to slow down, to be present, to find joy in the small moments that made up a life with a toddler. I got the final contracts from Helena yesterday, Isla said, breaking the comfortable silence. The book series is officially going to print. That's amazing. Ethan turned to look at her, his gray eyes bright with genuine pride. You should be celebrating. I am. We are. She smiled. Elodie's going to have her college funds secured before she's even potty trained. Speaking of which, Ethan said casually, I found a pediatrician here in Montauk, in case we ever need one on weekends. The comment was careful, neutral, but Isla heard what he wasn't saying. He was thinking long-term. He was imagining a future where their weekend arrangement became something more permanent. Ethan, I know, he said quickly. I know we haven't talked about it. I know you're not ready for more, but I wanted you to know that I'm ready. Whenever you are, however you want this to work, I'm ready. Isla studied his profile, the strong jaw, the way his hair curled slightly in the humid air, the new lines around his eyes that came from squinting into the sun while watching their daughter play. He looked different here, younger somehow despite the passage of time, happier. Do you miss it? She asked. The old life? The parties? The social scene? The women throwing themselves at you? Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. I thought I would, he admitted. For the first few weeks I kept waiting to feel trapped, to resent the limitations, but instead, he gestured toward Elodie, who was now building a very lopsided sandcastle. Instead, I feel like I finally found what I was looking for all along. And what was that? Home. He turned to meet her eyes. You and Elodie, you're my home, Isla. You always were. I was just too scared and too stupid to see it. Before Isla could respond, Elodie came running toward them, sand covering her hands and a huge grin on her face. Mama, Dada, castle! She pointed proudly at her creation. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Isla said, lifting Elodie onto her lap. You're such a good builder. Like Dada, Elodie announced. Dada builds big buildings. That's right, Ethan said, tickling her bare feet. But your castles are much better than Daddy's buildings. As Elodie giggled and squirmed, Isla felt something shift inside her chest. 6 months ago, she'd been certain that she and Ethan could never work, that their worlds were too different, their past too painful to overcome. But sitting here, watching him be the father she'd always known he could be, seeing how he'd changed his entire life to accommodate theirs, maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe love was enough, if it was the right kind of love, patient love, selfless love, love that was willing to change and grow and put family first. Nap time, Isla announced as Elodie's energy began to flag. No nap, Elodie protested, but her eyes were already heavy. How about a story first? Ethan suggested. In the big bed by the window, where we can see the ocean. 20 minutes later, Elodie was fast asleep between them, her small body curled against Ethan's chest while her hand clutched Isla's finger. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, painting everything in golden light. She's perfect, Ethan whispered, careful not to wake their daughter. She is, Isla agreed. We made something pretty incredible. We did. He looked up at her, and there was something different in his expression, something vulnerable and hopeful and terrifying. Isla, I need to ask you something. What? Will you marry me? Again? The question hung in the air between them like a prayer. Isla's breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ethan, I know it's complicated, he said quickly. I know I hurt you, and I know trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But I love you, Isla. I love you and I love our daughter. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm not the man who walked away from you. I want to be the man who chooses you every day, who puts our family first, who builds a life with you instead of just sharing one. Isla looked down at Elodie, sleeping peacefully between them, then back at Ethan. 6 months ago, she would have said no without hesitation. The wounds were too fresh, the fear too real. But 6 months was a long time, long enough to see that Ethan really had changed, long enough to realize that she'd changed too, long enough to understand that sometimes the greatest risk was not taking one at all. Ask me again in a year, she said softly. Disappointment flashed across his face, but he nodded. A year. But Ethan, she reached across their sleeping daughter to touch his cheek. I love you too. I never stopped loving you, even when I hated you. And if you can keep being this man, this father, this partner for another year, then yes, I'll marry you again. The smile that spread across his face was brighter than the sun reflecting off the ocean. I'll wait as long as you need. And if you ever decide you want your freedom again, never. His voice was fierce, certain. Never again, Isla. This is all I want. This is all I'll ever want. As if sensing the weight of the moment, Elodie stirred in her sleep, mumbling something that sounded suspiciously like happy. They both laughed softly, the sound mixing with the crash of waves outside. Later, as the sun began to set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Isla stood on the porch watching Ethan teach Elodie how to skip stones in the shallow water. Their daughter squealed with delight every time a stone bounced, clapping her hands and demanding again. For the first time in over 2 years, Isla allowed herself to believe in happy endings. Not the fairy tale kind, where everything was perfect and nothing ever went wrong, but the real kind, where love was a choice made daily, where families were built through commitment and patience and the willingness to keep trying even when things got difficult. The kind of happy ending that was just a beginning in disguise. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Isla smiled and went inside to start building the life she'd never dared to dream was possible, a life where love really could be enough. The end. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding the perfect person, but about choosing to love imperfectly, completely, and forever. What would you have done in Isla's place? Would you have taken the risk on love again? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.